Pam Bondi didn't flinch. She walked straight up to Jasmine Crockett. No fluff, no filter, just facts. The room had that charged tension you only feel when something real is about to go down. Cameras were already rolling, and most people assumed this would be a typical exchange. Some talking points tossed around, a few rehearsed zingers, and then everyone retreating back to their corners. But this wasn't that. This was something else entirely. She walked with purpose, her eyes locked on Jasmine, like she already knew how the conversation would end. No aides, no team whispering in her ear, no earpiece. Just her and her preparation. Jasmine, sitting with that trademark air of defiance, didn't rise at first. She just narrowed her eyes like she was ready to spar. But as soon as the first words left Bondi's mouth, the tone shifted instantly. There was no preamble, no grandstanding. She opened with a statement so grounded, so direct, it cut through the noise like a razor. She brought up a specific incident, a recent comment. Jasmine had made that sparked outrage and asked one simple question. Do you stand by that right here, right now? No accusations, just an opportunity, a moment of truth. And that's what made it powerful. The crowd wasn't prepared for that kind of quiet intensity. Jasmine smirked, clearly expecting a typical political attack she could dance around. She launched into a defensive retort, framing herself as misunderstood, twisting the narrative, trying to build sympathy through buzzwords and rhetorical tricks. But Bondi didn't take the bait. She didn't interrupt, didn't roll her eyes, didn't let emotion guide her response. She just waited. And when Jasmine finished her little performance, that's when the real confrontation began. Bondi calmly recited the full quote Jasmine had made, word for word, straight from the transcript. The way she delivered it, measured, cold, surgical, left no room for denial. She then pulled out the context, showing not just the line, but what was said before and after. It was clear she wasn't just there to score points. She was there to expose contradictions, to force honesty. The atmosphere turned from political theater to cross-examination, and Jasmine felt it. You could see the shift in Jasmine's demeanor. She leaned back, started blinking faster, her voice rising just a little too high when she responded. She tried to pivot, bringing up unrelated issues, trying to steer the moment in a different direction. But every time she did, Bondi brought it right back. Like a prosecutor in court, she refused to let the narrative drift into vague territory. She had a focus, and she held it with laser precision. Then came the moment that sent a ripple through the room. Bondi referenced something Jasmine had said behind closed doors, something that had been leaked but never confirmed publicly. Everyone thought it was hearsay, until Bondi dropped a direct quote, followed by a printed email. Jasmine froze, her mouth opened, but no words came out for a solid 5 seconds. In live political encounters, that kind of silence is rare and devastating. Bondi didn't gloat. She didn't raise her voice or act superior. She just asked, "Did you say this or not?" And there it was again, that moment of forced honesty. No spin, just a yes or no. Jasmine tried to deflect, to claim the quote was taken out of context, but Bondi had the full exchange printed out and ready. She wasn't just reacting. She had done the work. She knew exactly where this was going, and she was guiding it there with quiet force. Jasmine's frustration began to show. Her responses got more emotional, more erratic. She accused Bondi of attacking her character, of playing politics, of being part of some coordinated effort. But none of that stuck, because Bondi never raised. Her voice never insulted her. She stayed rooted in facts, time-stamped quotes, verified reports. There was no conspiracy here, just accountability. The crowd, once rowdy and vocal, fell into a quiet tension. You could hear murmurs. Some were surprised, others shocked. A few even nodded in silent agreement as the facts stacked up. Jasmine wasn't being destroyed with insults. She was being undone by her own words. And that made it all the more powerful. Bondi didn't have to twist anything. She just brought the truth into the light and watched it do the work. The most striking thing was Bondi's composure. While Jasmine leaned into her trademark fire and fury, Bondi was the opposite. Cool, deliberate, almost unshakable. Her strategy wasn't to provoke, but to reveal. And in doing so, she flipped the script entirely. Jasmine, who had built her brand on taking others to task, found herself cornered by the very tactics she often used on others. As the confrontation played out, it became clear this wasn't about winning an argument. It was about revealing character. Bondi never once asked the crowd for applause or validation. She wasn't grandstanding. She was confronting someone directly on their own turf and holding them to their words. That's rare. That's not the usual political theater. That's what made it unforgettable. Even when Jasmine tried to recover, tried to steer the energy back in her favor, the damage was done. She started using the word context like a shield, hoping it would neutralize everything. But by then, Bondi had already shown the full context, printed, cited, and verified. There was nowhere to run. It wasn't about volume. It wasn't about who could talk over the other. It was about who came prepared, who stayed composed, and who had truth on their side. Bondi's calmness made Jasmine's volatility seem unhinged, and that contrast was impossible to ignore. What started as just another confrontation in a long line of political clashes became something bigger, a moment where one person's clarity dismantled another's noise, and the one who stayed grounded came out on top, not by force but by control, not with rage but with restraint. Jasmine tried to clap back, but the more she talked, the more she unraveled. It was the kind of moment where someone's confidence starts off strong, but cracks begin to show the longer they speak. At first, she leaned into the usual tactics: firm, tone, big gestures, rapid-fire words meant to overwhelm. That strategy had worked for her before. She was used to being the loudest voice in the room, commanding attention, using passion as a shield. But this time, the shield didn't hold. Her initial response was fiery. She leaned forward, finger pointing, voice raised just enough to suggest dominance without tipping into a full-out tirade. She tossed out phrases that sounded strong, emotionally, charged words that were designed to stir the audience. But the trouble was, none of it was rooted in substance. There were no specifics, no answers, just noise dressed up as a rebuttal. She came in ready to fight, but she hadn't brought anything to fight with except volume. As the confrontation pressed on, you could see her reach for control. She began using phrases like, "Let me finish," or "You don't understand what I meant." Stall tactics masquerading as explanations. She interrupted. She doubled back on earlier statements. Her logic started spinning in circles, and the more she tried to assert dominance, the more obvious it became that she was scrambling. Every sentence added another layer of confusion. She started contradicting herself without realizing it. She claimed something was absolutely taken out of context, then moments later doubled down on that same point as if it was the heart of her argument. That's when it became clear. She wasn't answering questions. She was performing, and it wasn't working. Each time she spoke, she dug a little deeper into a hole that wasn't supposed to be there in the first place. She brought up completely unrelated issues, hoping to throw off the momentum. When asked about a specific comment she'd made, she responded by talking about policy issues that had nothing to do with the moment. It was a deflection, a common tactic, but it felt forced here. The room could feel it. The energy shifted. People stopped nodding. The crowd that might have cheered her on in other settings was watching with confusion now. She was talking louder, but she wasn't saying more. Her words felt scattered, her tone defensive. It's one thing to be passionate. It's another to be panicked. And that line was getting thinner by the second. She tried to take control back by asking rhetorical questions, throwing the heat back at her opponent. But those questions didn't land. They had no teeth. They weren't designed to make people think, just to buy time. Her voice started rising again, not out of strength, but frustration. She was clearly rattled, and she knew it. That fire in her voice wasn't confidence. It was desperation. At one point, she reached for a printed page and held it up like it proved her point. But as she began to read from it, it was clear she hadn't fully understood what it contained. She stammered mid-sentence, lost her place, tried to summarize it instead. That's when it hit. She hadn't come fully prepared. She had expected to win by personality alone, but personality wasn't enough in this moment. She needed facts, and facts were in short supply on her end. When she was pressed again, this time with a direct quote from something she had previously dismissed, she shifted tactics once more. Now, she was the victim. She claimed she was being mischaracterized, that the confrontation was unfair, that people were coming for her because of who she was, not what she said. That's the kind of pivot that might work once, maybe twice, but not when the issue is the very words she chose in public, with cameras rolling. She wasn't under attack. She was under scrutiny. And there's a difference. The emotions started to rise again. Her voice cracked slightly. Her pacing picked up. She repeated the same lines more than once. That's always a red flag. When someone starts looping, it means they've run out of new ground to cover. She was clinging to her talking points, like a lifeline, hoping repetition would transform confusion into clarity. But all it did was highlight the fact that she was stuck. You could see it in her eyes now. This wasn't going the way she thought it would. She looked to the audience for validation, hoping a nod or a cheer would help her reset. But the room stayed still. No interruptions, no applause, just silence. And silence can be louder than any shout when it follows someone who's used to commanding attention. Then came the breakdown in coherence. She misquoted herself. She said something, then denied saying it, then tried to reframe it as satire, all within the span of 2 minutes. And in that spiral, she lost the thread entirely. What started as a confident clapback turned into a tangled monologue full of contradictions. The strength of her argument didn't collapse because someone yelled louder. It collapsed because there was no foundation to begin with. She tried one last maneuver, pulling emotion into the frame. She invoked her background, her past struggles, her identity. She painted herself as someone fighting uphill battles every day. And that narrative, while powerful in other contexts, rang hollow here. Not because her story isn't valid, but because it had nothing to do with the confrontation at hand. It felt like a fallback, a distraction. And when someone shifts from explaining to evoking sympathy mid-argument, you know the facts have left the room. The most striking part was that she didn't seem to realize how far off course she'd gone. She was still talking like she was winning, even as the unraveling was clear. That's the danger of relying too much on style over substance. When the crowd stops reacting and the pressure keeps rising, all the bravado in the world can't hold the line. She thought she was clapping, back, but really she was unraveling in real time. Then came the moment that changed everything. Bondi hit her with one question, and the entire room went dead silent. It wasn't loud. It wasn't shouted over a podium. It wasn't accompanied by some grand gesture. It was quiet, direct, and carried with it the weight of undeniable truth. One question. That's all it took. Not 10. Not a filibuster of talking points. Just one laser-focused inquiry that sliced through the noise like a knife. It wasn't a gotcha question. It wasn't sensational or designed to create viral clips. It was the kind of question that forces a person to confront themselves. It came after a long exchange, one where the back and forth had started to feel almost theatrical. Sound bites, interruptions, smug grins, dramatic eye rolls. But then the theatrics stopped. All it took was that question. The tension in the air was immediate. You could feel it shift the second the words landed. It was a simple question, maybe 10 words or less, but those 10 words held a mirror up to everything that had been said. There was nowhere to hide after that. No way to twist it. No rhetorical escape route. And the person it was aimed at knew it instantly. She paused. Her face froze, not out of confusion, but recognition. She knew the question, she knew the context, and she knew the answer was not going to make her look good. That's the thing about real questions, the ones grounded in truth. They don't need to be shouted to be powerful. Their strength is in their simplicity, and this one hit like a freight train. She opened her mouth to respond, but nothing came out. Then she smiled. That forced smile people use when they're trying to buy time. She looked around the room as if searching for backup, but no one moved, no one spoke. The silence became oppressive. It was the kind of silence that doesn't just fall over a room, it lands hard. You could hear the whir of the cameras. You could hear someone cough in the back. But most of all, you could hear her struggling to find a way out. She finally responded, but it wasn't really an answer. It was a deflection. Something about nuance. Something about people twisting her words. But that wasn't what was being asked. The question was about her. About what she believed, what she stood for, what she had previously claimed without hesitation. The fact that she couldn't answer it, wouldn't answer it, was the answer in itself. Bondi didn't react. She didn't raise an eyebrow or gloat. She just waited, letting the silence speak louder than any commentary could. That restraint made the moment even more powerful. Because sometimes the most brutal blow isn't a shouted takedown, it's watching someone unravel in the face of their own contradictions. She tried to recover. She launched into a rambling explanation that quickly went off track. She started talking about past injustices, about people not understanding her lived experience. She even accused the questioner of framing her unfairly. But none of it mattered anymore. The power of that one question had already done its work. The audience knew it. The people on stage knew it. Most of all, she knew it. The room didn't erupt in chaos. There were no boos or cheers, just that heavy, loaded silence that meant everyone was processing what they just witnessed. People looked at each other with raised brows. Phones weren't being waved in the air to record anymore, because no one wanted to break the moment. The truth was unfolding right in front of them, and it was crystal clear. It was a masterclass in composure. Bondi hadn't interrupted, hadn't talked over anyone, hadn't tried to dominate through aggression. She had simply waited for the right moment, and then asked the right question. And the ripple effect it caused, immediate. The confrontation wasn't just about politics anymore, it was about integrity, about whether someone could stand behind their own words when the spotlight turned harsh. The person on the receiving end knew she was cornered, not physically, not even verbally. She was cornered by the facts. She was trying to spin, trying to twist, but it wasn't landing. People weren't buying it. Because when someone hesitates that long on a question they once answered so easily, it reveals something deeper. It reveals that maybe they never believed it in the first place. Eventually, she trailed off mid-sentence. Her voice softened. She shifted her weight in her seat. The fire was gone now. All that remained was discomfort. Her words had caught up with her, and now she was left trying to backpedal without making it obvious. But it was obvious. The audience could see right through it. Someone tried to redirect the conversation after that, likely in an attempt to ease the tension. But it was too late. That one moment had redefined the entire exchange. It didn't matter what else was said afterward. The defining memory was that question, and the silence that followed it. That's the thing about real truth. It doesn't need to be shouted from the rooftops. It just needs to be spoken with clarity and purpose. And when someone who built their image on being unshakable suddenly can't answer a single straightforward question, it leaves an impression. A lasting one. Not because someone got owned or destroyed, but because the truth made it impossible for them to keep pretending. And in a world of noise, sometimes one honest question can do more damage than 1,000 arguments. She had walked into that room with confidence, shoulders back, head high, eyes locked forward like someone expecting applause. She wasn't new to the stage or to cameras. She knew how to command attention. And for a while, it worked. The tone was sharp, the words measured, the performance practiced. But something started to shift the moment the questions turned real. The moment the surface-level talking points got pulled apart, thread by thread. What was once conviction quickly began to resemble something else, panic masked as passion. It became more about surviving the moment than standing on principle. Her voice, once steady and firm, began to rise, not in power, but in pitch. There's a difference, and people noticed. It's one thing to speak with strength. It's another to yell to cover weakness. When she felt herself losing control of the narrative, she fell back on the one thing she always believed would work: outrage. She tried to weaponize emotion, flipping the conversation into a spectacle. She gestured wildly, accused others of bias, and called into question the integrity of the conversation itself. But it wasn't working. The audience wasn't reacting the way she expected. Instead of cheering her on, they looked puzzled, some even uncomfortable. That was the turning point. You could see it on her face. The realization that her usual playbook wasn't enough here. The louder she got, the quieter the room became. Not out of intimidation, but because the noise had drowned out any trace of coherence. She wasn't answering questions. She was creating a scene, hoping that if she kicked up enough dust, no one would notice the ground crumbling beneath her. She started repeating herself, not because her points were strong, but because she had nothing new to add. The same phrases over and over, as if sheer repetition might make them true, but it only highlighted how little substance was actually there. She tried to pivot, to redirect the conversation onto safer ground. She invoked history, identity, hardship, anything that might shield her from scrutiny. But the problem wasn't the subject. The problem was that she couldn't defend what she had already said. That's when the unraveling began in earnest. Her facial expressions betrayed her. The eyes darted. The smile faded. The voice cracked slightly. She was trying to maintain control while clearly struggling to hold herself together. Every word she spoke became more about damage control than debate. The passion she had at the beginning was gone, replaced with frustration, defensiveness, and eventually, silence. And it wasn't because she had been attacked. It wasn't because someone cut her off or twisted her words. No one was shouting over her. No one was playing dirty. What rattled her was being faced with the truth, the kind of truth that doesn't bend or break when pressure is applied. The kind of truth that demands answers, not theatrics. She tried to regain the upper hand with volume, but there's something about yelling that makes people lean back instead of in. It doesn't draw attention, it repels it. And that's what happened. She became noise. Just another loud voice trying to cover for a lack of clarity. Her points no longer landed. They bounced off the walls and faded into the air. She was speaking, but no one was listening anymore. She began lashing out at the process itself, accusing others of setting traps, of creating false narratives, of being unfair. But the only trap was her own words, and the only narrative unraveling was hers. She had walked into that room thinking she was the one holding the cards, and now she was just trying to play defense against a reality that didn't care about appearances. Even her supporters in the room shifted uncomfortably. They wanted to believe in her, wanted to rally behind her. But what they saw wasn't courage or conviction. It was confusion. She was grasping at straws, trying to rewrite the moment, even as it played out in front of everyone. Every time she insisted she hadn't said something, the receipts were right there. Every time she tried to move the goalposts, someone gently reminded her where the original line was. She didn't realize it at first, but she was being undone by her own insistence. The more she denied, the more people remembered. The more she tried to distract, the clearer the central issue became. It was no longer about policies or sound bites. It was about credibility, about whether she could own her words instead of running from them. And the thing is, she didn't have to implode. She could have paused, taken a breath, acknowledged the misstep, and moved forward. But pride got in the way. She believed the only way through was to fight her way out, no matter how incoherent the fight became. And that's what the audience saw. Not someone being silenced, someone refusing to listen, not someone being unfairly attacked, someone refusing to be accountable. The final moments were the most telling. She tried one last time to recenter the conversation, to remind everyone of who she was, what she stood for, and why she deserved respect. And in a vacuum, that speech might have worked. It had rhythm, it had fire, it even had a few applause-worthy lines. But it rang hollow, because the words didn't match the moment. They felt disconnected from what had just unfolded. The applause never came, just more silence. That kind of silence that says more than any criticism ever could. It wasn't anger. It wasn't applause. It was disappointment. The kind that comes when someone had the opportunity to lead with truth and chose instead to hide behind noise. And as she sat there, still trying to salvage what remained of her composure, you could see it. Her realizing that she hadn't been silenced. She had simply lost control of the narrative, not because of some trick or tactic, but because the truth, once spoken clearly, doesn't need to shout to be heard. In the end, it wasn't the confrontation that defined the moment. It was the unraveling that followed. What was supposed to be just another back and forth turned into something far more revealing. The spotlight didn't just shine, it exposed. It cut through the practiced confidence, the carefully rehearsed lines, and left behind the raw truth of someone who wasn't ready to face real accountability. This wasn't about political sides or partisan noise. It was about character, about what happens when someone is no longer able to control the script and is forced to speak without a teleprompter. We often forget that the most powerful moments don't always come from shouting matches or viral sound bites. Sometimes they come in the silence, when the crowd stops clapping, the camera keeps rolling, and the person behind the podium realizes they've run out of places to hide. She walked into the room expecting praise. She left with the weight of her own words pressing down on her. And that's the true heart of this story. It's not about being owned or destroyed. It's about being confronted with truth and realizing too late that emotional outbursts don't cancel facts. That yelling over someone doesn't erase what was already said, and that if your only defense is volume, your message was never strong to begin with. It was a moment that left everyone watching just a little quieter than before. Because even those who may have walked in cheering her on were now asking themselves, if she can't answer the questions, what does that say about the answers she claims to have? There are moments that live far beyond the broadcast, moments that echo because they reveal something deeper than the debate itself. This was one of those moments. A reminder that truth doesn't always need to roar. Sometimes it just needs to stand firm and wait. And when the shouting fades and the lights go dim, what stays with people isn't the performance, it's the honesty, or the lack of it. The story didn't end with fireworks or applause. It ended with a room full of people realizing that some truths don't need defending, and some claims can't be defended at all. The silence told the story better than any headline could. And in that silence, a lesson rang loud and clear. When the time comes to speak up, make sure what you're standing on is stronger than the volume you speak with. Because when the show is over, only the truth remains.